Hello, General. How are you, sir?
Hey, I'm good. Thank
You're
you,
doing a
Dave.
fantastic job, sir. We appreciate you.
I think I'm going to earn my beverage this evening.
Yes, I'll have to ship it to you, but it's on me. Well, I really appreciate that. It was an honor to have Secretary Nielsen. Appreciate the very thoughtful interaction that you all had. It was wonderful. You're going to have a panel here with some other very bright people, and we're really appreciate your helping put that together. Without any further ado, I'll turn it over to you, and you can connect with your folks. And we look forward to hearing your comments.
Great. Well, thanks, David, and thanks to my team here that has assembled this afternoon. And we're going to take the conversation in a little bit different direction than we've heard earlier today. We're going to talk about global markets, and the topic specifically is deploying new tech globally, security, investment, and legal considerations. We have a really unique panel, if I do say so myself, and one that I think is going to give us some really diverse thoughts. So I'm going to do sort of a brief intro for everybody, and then we'll turn it back over to you guys to amplify a little bit. Tell us about kind of your current position and what your company specializes in, and then we'll get right into the discussion. And hopefully the discussion is going to be really between the panel members. I'll facilitate and chime in where I need to, but really hoping that the panel members can kind of kick some of these topics around. So first up is Lauren Bedula, and Lauren is a Senior Vice President of Beacon Global Strategies, a strategic advisory firm specializing in international policy, defense, cyber, and homeland security. Lauren has a double major from American University, serves on the board of directors for the Young Professional Foreign Policy, and is a visiting fellow at Auburn University and GW University. Adam Leslie. Adam is a proud graduate of the Australian Defence Force Academy and the Royal Military College. He was a helicopter gunship pilot in the Australian Army, did a stint in Australian Army intelligence, and then was a member of the Defence Intelligence Organization in Australia, where he led the Australian office in the Middle East and Africa, based in Dubai. He served tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, Dubai, and in Thailand. And now he's the CEO of Leavenhall, an innovation, business development, and intelligence advisory firm based in Silicon Valley. Next up is David Tressler. David is the Deputy General Counsel of Waymo. Waymo is the autonomous car division of Alphabet, Google's parent company. He's a graduate of Harvard Law School, a former professional staffer on the Hill, and a corporate litigator. He also happens to be an Army Reserve intelligence officer. He's a seasoned legal executive with deep experience in high-stakes, high-profile litigation and strategic counseling to executives. David works at Waymo, but he's here today as a private citizen and not on behalf of Waymo or the Army Reserve. And then finally is Tanvir Kathawala. Tanvir is the founder and managing partner of Pioneer 1890, an investment and advisory firm that partners with companies to create and establish new markets. He's also a venture partner in NextGen Venture Partners. Previously, he was the COO and CFO and part of a founding team at Analytical Space, a venture-based satellite company named as Fast & Company's 2009 list of most innovative companies. Tanvir is a BA in political science and economics from George Washington and studied at the East China Normal University. So thanks to my crew for being here. And I think, again, we'll just start with a little bit from each of you to talk about your current companies and kind of what you do there. We gave you the title and all that, but maybe we can dig a little bit deeper and talk about sort of your area of specialty. So Lauren, if you don't mind, we'll let you go first.
Yes, thanks so much, Bo, and to the team who organized today. It's a fantastic event, and I think important topic that we're here to discuss. So as Bo mentioned, I'm a Senior Vice President at Beacon Global Strategies, where I lead our work around disruptive technologies in the national security space. So what that means is essentially helping companies that are new to US government markets or national security markets navigate kind of the boundaries to entry and help them think through use cases in the national security world and how to talk about their technologies. And so we've just seen, I think, incredible demand and interest in this space as on the government side, we've seen such interest in pulling in non-traditionals or dual use companies. So I spend my days navigating those issues. And then I'm also a partner at the Silicon Valley Defense Group, where I focus on these issues from the nonprofit side as well. So Bo, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks. So Tanvir?
Oh, thank you so much, General Young, and for David and Michelle and the American Futures team for having me. So I spend my day kind of similar to Lauren, trying to help companies, trying to build seed to Series A companies that are serving the national security market and serving the commercial market. And we really are focused on the convergence of companies that can serve a critical national security need, that also there's a same level of demand for that product, in the private sector. So I think to take something that Secretary Nielsen said in the last panel, we are really interested. We're doing a lot of work with companies that are trying to help using technology to make our reality a little more clear. So we're working closely with some cross-border companies in the disinformation space and the kind of drone space. So with that, I'll turn it over back to General Young to kick us off.
Adam?
Yeah, thanks, Bo. So I'm Australian, obviously, in a sea of colleagues, which is I'm very grateful for. And my background, as Bo mentioned, was in the Army initially, and then in Australia's Foreign Intelligence Service, so the Australian equivalent of the CIA. And I'm pretty recently, I guess, retired from there, having married a CIA officer and then moving to Silicon Valley in the US. And that was in early 2019, so pretty recent practitioner. And when I got here, I formed Leavenhall with a couple of colleagues from the agency and from Australia. And we initially started doing something completely different. We were doing commercial intelligence in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. And as I started doing business development in Silicon Valley, I started coming across amazing technology companies that had relevance to national security. And about half the time, the companies had no clue that they had a use case that might be relevant. And the other half the time, they kind of knew, but didn't know how to get there, didn't know where the front door of the CIA was. And so we pivoted the company to essentially build a portfolio of technology companies that we thought were relevant to national security, to then map the pathways, to traction and to get that technology in the door. But not just in the US. We pretty quickly started working on Australia and then Canada, then the UK, and more recently New Zealand, sort of rounding out the Five Eyes. And we've built a team of consultants with similar backgrounds that do that service. We initially were focused on consulting to those companies, much like Lauren and Tanvir, helping them get positioned for national security. And funnily enough, it's a common set of challenges that each company faces across the Five Eyes, relating to getting their, and I think this will be a theme today as we sort of expand on this, getting the threat vector, the threat surfaces within the company kind of locked down. So, foreign investment profile, supply chain risk, insider threat, and cybersecurity readiness. So we started consulting on that, and then consulting on business development, trying to get those technologies to where they need to be, but doing it in a way that sort of utilized the alliance to get there. It's probably enough from me for the moment, and I'll hand back to you, Bo. Thanks.
With you and your wife, both with your intelligence backgrounds, when I think of your children, I think, wow, they have their work cut out for them, but maybe you guys have your work cut out for you too, with what you've, with the gene pool there that would be facing here when they get to be teenagers. So, David.
Thanks, Bo. It's great to be a part of this very cross-functional panel. So I think it's going to be a really, really good discussion, and appreciate the chance to get this group together by America's Future. Appreciate it. I come to this discussion with the perspective on the legal side in the private sector in emerging technology development, thinking through as Deputy General Counsel at Waymo, everything from regulation to investment to product development, AI, machine learning use, and international regulation, everything, kind of the whole gamut, when thinking through how to deploy technology commercially. Prior to that, I was a partner at a law firm, global law firm, Kirkland & Ellis, where we thought through and advised companies on everything from high stakes litigation. The firm does a lot of private equity and M&A as well. And I also come with experience in intelligence on the military side as a U.S. Army Reserve officer who's had a relatively varied career in intelligence in different places around the world, focused on different areas. And so I think the application of both of those to the topic today is going to be very interesting. Have I think a lot of good thoughts that we'll be sharing together. And I'll turn it back over to you to get the discussion started, Bo. Thanks.
Okay, great, thanks. So I think everybody can see why I'm so excited about the panel and the talent we have. Most of the discussion so far today has been US-centric, and that's kind of natural given where we're located and of course the size of the market. But as others have noted, we have allies as well, and certainly foreign markets. And Adam, I wonder if you could kind of kick us off here talking about this and some of the challenges accessing foreign markets that some of our companies out there may not be aware of, and then some of the opportunities as well.
Yeah, sure, no worries. And look, I think I touched on it a little bit in my introduction, which is that one of the kind of misapprehensions that especially US companies are under is that the US market is exactly the same as the Australian market and the British market and any market overseas, and that, you know, once you've got yourself lined up for the US market, then, you know, you can just roll straight into you know, to a like market and sort of plow through the same sort of internal structure considerations that you do in the US, and that's mostly true, but there are some pretty subtle nuances in each country within the allies, and of course, as you start to step out the rings to sort of different markets, of course, it starts to vary greatly, and there are associated risks with that. There is also another perception that maybe you might want to try a foreign market first before you sort of have a crack at the behemoth that is the US national security domain, and that's not necessarily ill-advised. In fact, there can be some benefits to that, but one of the considerations for each of the Commonwealth countries outside the US is that they're very focused, much like the US is, they're focused on their own sovereign industry. So there's a sovereign industry component to national security that resides within each of the countries, and they are looking to promote Australian companies, British, etc. companies ahead of foreign companies. So there are additional considerations about partnering with a local, you know, making sure that you get the kind of the local flavor pulled into your company, and then of course there's some cultural issues too. We're all very similar, but we're not exactly the same, and there are some challenges there amongst all of us as we move throughout the system. But there are opportunities. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, Adam, it says I couldn't agree with you more. When I was running analytical space, we were trying to sell commercial shoebox-sized satellites. 2 years before we even engaged the Air Force and DoD, we actually got early conversations with Luxembourg and British government. And I think having those engagements made us a lot better prepared when we, even as an American company, to go into our own Defense Department, because I think there's a lot of just lingo and muscles and just having that perspective, that national security perspective, in a more smaller ponds kind of helps you before you kind of go to the Department of Defense or DHS.
Yeah, absolutely right. And to the flip side, though, as Bo mentioned, is that there is tremendous opportunity, and there's opportunity that may not be linear in terms of straight revenue or adding to the bottom line. Outside the US, the markets are orders of magnitude smaller than the US, and that is a consideration. However, there are, I'll give you Australia as a good example, because I'm from there, and I'm sure my government would love me to advocate for this. But Australia is a really good test market. I mean, it behaves in similar ways to the US. The people, both commercially and for national security, respond the sort of same way as Americans do to marketing and to outreach and all the rest of it. The structures are kind of similar, and of course, it can be a little bit cheaper operating down there, especially with the exchange rate as it is. And so you get to go over to a market, test your equipment out, test this market space, see if you can get traction, start building a reputation, potentially even get, if you go down an Australian partnership route, getting listed on the Australian Stock Exchange much more quickly than you would in the US, and to then bounce back over to the larger market, having tested all your opportunities. The other part of it is, of course, if you're thinking about total addressable market as something which raises your own value as a company, as a startup, whilst the US market is 60 times bigger than everywhere else, you can increase your own total addressable market by expanding it to 4 or more other countries, which ultimately then raises your own value, if that's something that you're considering as being important.
Great, Lauren, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I love this topic because I think there are so many different factors that are important to be aware of, particularly for entrepreneurs who are new founders, or if you're fundraising or thinking through partnerships within the US government, but also internationally. So I like to think about kind of this question and addressing foreign markets, similar to what Adam was saying, as far as a bit of a spectrum of who we kind of deem allies or strong partners to work with. And I think on the Five Eyes front, to Adam's point about just finding the front door of the CIA or US government partners here, if you're an American company, is so difficult. So I think there are challenges in figuring out who the critical stakeholders are or decision makers abroad, but really starting with the Five Eyes, which I think folks on the call are familiar with, but that's beyond the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And these, I think, are not only countries that our national security leaders are encouraging partnerships with, but also trying to facilitate some of those interactions. Just as far as efficiencies go or working together, it's important for our national security posture. So I think, I don't want to make it sound easy, but I think that there's progress being made because we're realizing that there are global implications to the national security landscape right now, and we need to figure out who we're working with as far as adopting new technologies, but not just focusing on US companies, but looking at markets within the Five Eyes, for example, to scope new technology areas. And I think partnerships are a great way to do that. I think it also certainly varies. So thinking of a spectrum from the Five Eyes to who we deem kind of adversaries, and then approaching international partners with that in mind. And then second, it depends what your business is, right? So if you're selling donuts, you can operate anywhere and be fine. But what we're talking about today is really around national security partnerships. And I think we're going to continue to see even more scrutiny on whether it's accepting capital from who we deem adversaries, or joint ventures, or selling into those markets. So I think it is so important for founders to be aware of these risks, because it'll certainly limit your ability to do business with the US government, but also many US companies. And I think we're going to continue to see crackdown on this. We, with the current administration, saw a new supply chain executive order that lists critical sectors, which I think translates well into what this administration deems critical, but it's not a political issue. And there are ways to navigate it. And I think we can get into that a little bit later. But I think, you know, approaching this issue of international growth based on the country you're dealing with, and then also based on what business you're in, are two important ways to look at this.
David, you want to take a swing?
Yeah, I think Lauren brought up some key aspects of issues that I think about on the legal side, because the risks that she's talked about, that you're talking about, Lauren, are there's regulatory regimes that really govern those. And on the one hand, and this has been mentioned in earlier panels today, there's a real challenge and a tension between the rapid pace of technology development and commercial application of technology, commercial uses for new technology, and the pace of innovation, and the desire by governments, including agencies and US government, to regulate and control those uses. And so there's a real challenge in navigating some of those for especially new startups in a way that doesn't create risk for you down the road. And so I think, like on the one hand, there's hope that the government is going to get is going to keep up with the pace and enable. But at the same time, there are regulatory regimes in place now that companies have to think about when they're thinking about going globally. And as a lawyer, I promise I only don't think about risk and these kinds of things. These really are for the purpose of the opportunities and being able to leverage and capitalize on the opportunity internationally. Finding a way to navigate that in order to take advantage of those opportunities in a way that doesn't foreclose further investment or commercial opportunities down the road. And so some of the things that Lauren has been talking about, whether that's export control and the new rules that are going to be looking at procuring goods or services from certain countries or companies, those are all going to be really important to dig into, and that goes for investment and for taking your technology abroad. So we can dive into those in more detail, but I just did want to touch on it's a really important point, and while also realizing that the regulatory regimes are changing, the enforcement landscape is changing, but also in some ways becoming more clear and less political, even as we change administrations, that there's a real consensus around the national security concerns related to investment. I'll pause there, but we can continue to go into that. I also just wanted to really double down on the opportunity point, which is something, a point that Adam and Lauren have both made too. So it's a matter of navigating some of those risks.
Yeah, so let me just pivot off that a little bit and come to Tanvir. As a venture capitalist who invests in companies, I'm sure that you have limited partners, many limited partners, and maybe from throughout the world, or not. I don't know. You can tell us. But how do you sort of assess the pros and cons of foreign investment from the vantage point of a venture capitalist?
Yeah, that's a great question, General, and something that anyone in the national security investment world, or any founder or entrepreneur, I saw this firsthand as an operator. I wish I was able to engage with Adam earlier on when I was running analytical space, because early on we had taken some money, a larger amount of money from the Middle East, And when we came to some of the, as our national security business grew, it became a little bit of a hurdle that we had to kind of explain ourselves and come up with. We had to essentially basically kind of create our own SPV to put some of our syndicate, our kind of foreign investors in segment on our cap table to satisfy our kind of U.S. government stakeholders. So to David's point, engaging good counsel early on is not just to identify risk, but think of good entrepreneurs thinking constraints, right? If you can identify the sandbox you have to play in and think creatively within that sandbox, you will save yourself a lot of heartache and are able to capitalize on a lot more opportunities than kind of just try to kind of ignoring that error and peril. I've had a failed startup on that same mindset. So I say someone who invests in national security, I kind of focus intentionally on LPs that are domestic based, because when you do have a large amount of foreign money, you raise red flags, right? And so I would love, I know there's trusted capital, I would love a more comprehensive solution that we could develop a system where foreigners who are LPs in funds, or people who there is a self-certifying system where you can go through that. But right now it feels like there's a lot of variability. So you're safer just to go domestic for most of your capital sources, or have to have a special exception other than that. Yeah, I'd love to get maybe David, Adam, or Lauren to maybe also share more.
Or go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a couple of things that for founders out there that you may or may not have come across, and that's CFIUS and FIRMA, which are two of the most horrible acronyms I think I've heard. Sounds like the evil empire. CFIUS is the Committee for Foreign Investment in the US, and FIRMA is the Foreign Investment and, let me just see, what is it? Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act.
Modernization Act.
Essentially, to David's point, essentially that's the regulatory environment which sort of limits and protects key technologies and infrastructure from adverse foreign interference. And it's a fairly arduous process to go through, but obviously incredibly important for protecting the US. But there are some real tricks for young players there, and David sort of touched on some of the key ones, which is understanding when you sort of engage with venture, understanding who the LPs are in a venture firm, understanding what access the LPs have to your intellectual property, what access they have to decision making. But it is certainly a disruption tactic from our adversaries to sort of surreptitiously invest in companies in order for them to be blocked. Well, so firstly, to get hold of their IP, but then secondarily to prevent them from being ingested into the national security space. So it is definitely something you need to be aware of and focus on consciously in terms of who you're taking money from before especially if you're on a national security domain pathway.
Yeah, I've just added something, it's kind of, not to get too tactical, is something, oftentimes, it's an awkward position as the entrepreneur, you're raising money from venture capital firms, and then you come to the table and says, you got to tell me who your LPs are, right? It's an awkward, you burn a lot of relationship capital that way. I would say, one thing that's be proactive when you're negotiating your seed round or series A or whatever round you're negotiating, make sure whenever your counsel is, when it comes to information rights, make sure you have some latitude there, because having that variable, being able to adjust that and calibrate that depending on how your national security relationship is progressing, that can save you a lot of heartache if you can kind of preemptively say, hey, I'm going to be going after some U.S. government business. I might need to be able to kind of tighten those information rights as those things go forth. Then having to do that retroactively can be a pain.
Yeah, and look, the good news is that there's two parts to the good news. The first one is that it's slightly bad, which is that for CFIUS and FIRMA, for good reasons, that there had to be a level playing field, so there's no exemptions. except that there is now, and that the Five Eyes have been given exemptions, or I think, I'm not sure if it's all the Five Eyes, but certainly Australia and the UK have been given exemptions under CFIUS. I'm not sure if that's extended to FIRMA. I don't know if anyone wanted to comment on that, but essentially there's been a recognition that friendly investment is okay, and that then there's greater scrutiny required for sort of beyond that. So that's a good thing.
Wanna-
Yeah, when
Go ahead, Lauren.
go ahead, Lynn.
I was just going to pull the thread a little bit on the trusted capital marketplace. I know we referenced that briefly, and I think it's something for us to watch, particularly for investors. And I think Tanvir and Adam, you both hit on this, where, you know, there is more public information, right, than figuring out who the LPs of a fund are. And I think that what we saw with TCM, the Trusted Capital Marketplace, was DoD's attempt to basically have investors turn over that information, but they weren't really incentivized to do so. But I think we're going to keep seeing trends in this direction, where there's an interest in labeling investors as trusted or not, or figuring out how to more directly sort through who we want to do business with and who we don't. So I think, to the point about having funders ask these questions, it could be uncomfortable, but a good way to do it is through the lens of your interest in the US government markets, national security markets, because that also impacts their investment, right? And I think that there are more and more investors now who are interested in kind of these big opportunities within DoD or the IC, knowing that it'll take some time, but these are the white whales, right? Big contracts if you can get there. So I think we'll continue to see kind of interest in defining who is trusted and not from the VC world, and it's important for founders to be thinking about. And the Trusted Capital Marketplace is a good example of those initiatives.
No, that's
David?
that's a great point. When I think about these issues, I think in terms of investment on the one hand and export control on the other, both of which are going to be important for companies to think about. On the investment side, which is I think largely what we've been focusing on so far, they do focus first on the jurisdiction, which is usually triggered by transactions, right? Investment transactions and investments. And it also, though, can be things like board seats or certain information sharing. So there are complexities there that you need to dig into and should be thinking about. But there is an analysis that's done by the CFIUS agencies. And so I think on the trusted side, that is I think a hopeful development, and I think would help move things along significantly. But outside of that trusted space or Five Eyes, there's still going to be an analysis of whether the investment and the transaction that is being analyzed poses a national security risk. And so it isn't automatic that an investment from a foreign source is going to lead to, remediation or divestment or other requirements. It may be that they review it and find that that CFIUS isn't concerned. So, but it's the kind of hoops you have to go through. They do have a new enforcement and monitoring arm under FIRMA that is still, in a sense, standing up, but there is more muscle there and more expanded scope in terms of the eyes that are looking at these issues. And so I think that's continuing to drive review of these things. On the export control side, I'll just say briefly, because this could be a topic in and of itself, but we'll just try to keep it narrow, is just for awareness, kind of familiarization. I mean, you have, I don't want to just throw in acronyms either, right? ITAR and EAR are really focused on ensuring that critical technologies in the US are not exported and then, the IP is lost potentially. And so that can be anything from sharing technology with customers. It can include foreign persons here in the US that have access to your technology or your IP. So it doesn't even mean that your product goes overseas. And increasingly under a new set of rules promulgated under the prior administration, but being implemented and exercised under the current one, companies that procure goods or services from certain countries can also be reviewed under some of those regimes. So, and that's all toward the goal of ensuring that critical IP and technology developed here in the U.S. for the U.S. is not used by adversaries against us. So I think that's that also speaks to, someone mentioned the difference between donuts and technology. What triggers these is critical technology, critical infrastructure, or sensitive personal data. Usually referred to as TID, if you hear that term. TID businesses. If you're a TID business, and let's assume that most that we're talking about today are in some form or fashion, then that will be something that will be subject to potentially. So we'll have to keep an eye out for that.
And if I could just quickly piggyback, because David makes a great point about thinking about this problem in buckets, and not to discourage folks, but really just to be aware of what you're getting into. So David talked about accepting foreign investment, selling internationally, but also we're seeing a lot of spotlight on where is your supply chain. And so I saw a couple of comments about CMMC or the Endless Frontiers Act. And so looking to really lock down where products are made. And we've seen some high profile breaches recently that have exposed the importance of supply chain security. So something else I think for founders to think about too when manufacturing outside of the US, where are they choosing to do so, and what will that mean for their ability to do business in the US, or what can we expect down the road as far as tighter restrictions on that front. So I think increasing demand on buy American, made in America, but looking at that allied approach as well as part of this.
I think the important thing here is that, I mean, this is a particularly difficult space to navigate for a commercial dual use company, being, which hopefully you're all familiar with that term, but meaning a company that has a commercial use case, usually commercial forward, and then sort of deviates to have a national security use case, is that there is an entanglement that goes with the national security use case, and that entanglement needs to be considered deliberately as part of that engagement. And so, as Lauren said, I think the bucket way of looking at it is a really nice way to do it. Some of those buckets are policed, like FIRMA and other things, supply chain. Others are not. Like ITAR is a self-assessment initially, and there is a risk that you could sort of blunder into an ITAR breach without knowing you've done it. And that will then have consequences when you get told to undo it. So there's I guess the point here is that, navigating national security, the national security market is something that needs to be done deliberately, a thought through strategy, considering all the sort of the challenges. And I think, look, generally speaking, there is a group of people, I think everyone in this on this panel, but who are trying to encourage the government to kind of flip the script a little bit and think about how those, how difficult it is to manage those buckets, and to try to make it easier. Because really what we want to make sure is that that the best technology and the sort of the technology that's going to have the biggest impact on national security actually makes it to the pointy end. Because it's, as a founder, it's sometimes a really quite easy decision. You can take a giant chunk of money from the Saudis, or you can go up against a couple of years worth of pain to get into national security. And some people make that decision really quickly and don't think about the consequences of doing that.
Yeah, I just want to piggy off Adam and Lauren's point on just to zoom out a little big picture here. Right now there's a bill going through the Senate that's going to put a lot of money to that wants to beef up, for example, the critical infrastructure agency, to make it a $5 billion agency. That's what the House chairman says. There's the bar capabilities to counter, China and Russian disinformation and cyber capabilities. right? When the government makes these policies, they're gonna put it back to these agencies, and these are new capabilities that these agencies now have to contend with, right? And they're going to be looking for outside partners to help them accomplish this mission. So there is the exciting thing about the government in the national security space is there's all these, if you're interested in cutting edge technology, there's a lot of, and you want your users to be the people that are using your technology to use the cutting edge nature of that. You know, the government does offer, there's these pockets where you really can get on the bleeding edge, and they can be that first customer that helps you, you know, then go to, you know, compete against the IBM, Accentures, and the big legacy tech, you know, legacy companies in the world because you've been critically battle tested. And so the national security market offers this interesting slingshot. But I will say from advice, you know, if you're a seed stage company, hire a regulatory affairs person, engaging with your regulator to understand FIRMA, to understand ITAR early on, even just to have that awareness, even if you're not, you know, you have no active conversation in your pipe, can make you, when those opportunities do emerge, I think, you know, I'm a big baseball analogy fan. You know, national security is a market, we got to wait for your pitch. Don't try to swing at everything, wait for your pitch. But having that awareness at least gets you in the stadium.
Yeah, and I'd also like to jump off. I think there's a couple of questions of it in the chat, but also Lauren mentioned it about the cybersecurity readiness. And, you know, it's a new responsibility put on companies to get themselves to a certain level of preparedness for cyber attack, and it kind of got accelerated on the back of SolarWinds. And so in about October last year, the DoD started implementing this cybersecurity readiness model, which is called unhelpfully the CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and it essentially sort of steps you using the NIST framework as opposed to an ISO framework. So there's, you know, a whole bunch of, you know, we can get into the weeds on this, but, you know, the point is that it's kind of sets in place a sort of a rigid cybersecurity process that is turned then into government speak and then made really difficult to understand. I mean, cybersecurity stuff is hard enough to understand as it is, but then it goes through this sort of, you know, mashed up filter that the government bureaucracy has, and it spits out something which is really hard to work with. As a decision for a young startup on where you're going to put your effort, regardless of whether you're going into national security or not, cybersecurity is really important, right? And it's something that initially you sort of think, oh, it's expensive, it's hard to do. But if you build in cybersecurity sort of fundamentals into your workspace, into your onboarding of people, onto, you know, the whole sort of security package, it'll not only help you in the national security space, but it'll also help you in the commercial space. And it's one of those things where I really would advocate strongly that it's an important thing to do regardless.
So I'd like to I could double tap on that because when I think about cybersecurity, I think not only cybersecurity for the security of your products and your technology, but also the protection of your IP. And IP protection broadly would be one of the top 2 or 3 considerations that I would say any young company thinking about taking their tech internationally need to think about. And that includes, you know, thinking through your patent strategy. Are you protected before you take your product overseas? How are you thinking about what you're trying to patent versus what you want to keep secret through trade secrets? In some cases, you know, companies need to make judgment calls about what they're going to disclose to the patent office and patent publicly in order to protect, which then has some reciprocity in jurisdictions around the world, and what to keep secret and proprietary under trade secret status, which also has protection in most jurisdictions, certainly in the US, but means you have to take measures at your company to keep them secret and do everything reasonable to ensure that they remain confidential. And then a third, and I think especially or equally important aspect is a little bit more what Adam was talking about, which is the broad-based protection and security measures you're taking around cybersecurity. That includes supply chain, it includes physical security measures at your facilities and on your systems, control of data, and also security around employees and those working with you, whether they're vendors or contractors, but who may have access to your facility or to your data or to your technology. We know that adversaries have programs like the 1,000 Talents program that are targeted at placing people within companies as a way of understanding and exfiltrating intellectual property. And there is no better place to do it but at young companies that haven't thought through these security measures yet and haven't thought through how to vet and protect against that. So I just kind of hitting IP, intellectual property considerations really quickly there. I think about those three aspects.
Mm-hmm. And just to expand a little bit there too, and I think it's a great point that Adam and David both made about, you do this for your company, don't do it necessarily just because it's this compliance headache, but we've seen case after case of companies really ultimately failing because they weren't protecting their IP. And so that's why on the US government side, we're seeing much tighter restrictions around these issues, but it's also a benefit to your company. And I think Tanvir, I'm glad to hear kind of the positive twist here about the investments being made in these areas, because if I was a founder listening right now, I'd probably have exited or been discouraged by how complicated doing business in this space is. That said, we're just seeing an incredible amount of investment, and I think again, these issues are not political. We're seeing our government on the same page about how important it is to engage non-traditionals and bring them in and work with the DoD and the IC. So there are many outlets to do so, and engaging counsel, I think, is certainly important to ask some of the questions that we're asking today. But there's also great information out there on lawfare, or just to start getting smart. By being here today, you're educating yourself on some of the questions you should be asking. So I think that's a significant step in the right direction. But also looking to navigate innovation hubs, because on the international piece, which I know we're here to discuss today, you're seeing a lot of, I think, evolution from InQtel or the Defense Innovation Unit pulling in liaisons from our partners. And so something that I think is really important to do to get their ear and their time is to study what is our national defense strategy? What will the next one look like? What are government leaders talking about as far as priority areas, and how can you help? So really getting smart on the mission aspect and how you talk about use cases or what you do to resonate with folks like that. Right before this call, I was on with a client in Paycom, and it was a kind of impressive group from the S&T team who said, thank you so much for including quotes from our commander. Thank you for taking the time to learn about what our priority areas are. To kind of meet in the middle or show what you're talking about, I think is a good way to get access to some of the funding that Tanvir had mentioned. And we're only going to continue to see increasing demand and opportunities for partnership too, because a lot of what we're talking about on the compliance side is tough for dual use companies. But companies who are integrators or more traditional defense contractors, I think, are under a lot of pressure right now to figure out how to work with startups. And that can help kind of take you through the process or piggyback perhaps on some of their business development efforts. But again, the purpose today is not to scare you away from these markets. It's so important that you're here today and also at the table when we're talking about the future of national security. But make sure you're asking these questions so that the future of your business is secure, and then also your ability to do work in this space is secure. I wanted a positive spin there.
That's incredibly well said, Lauren. I think the things that we're talking about are solvable. And the headline I think that we're saying here is think about them so that you can solve them early, and you don't get yourself tied up later on when either you've taken on risk you didn't expect or anticipate. But it's much easier to do that hygiene early.
Yeah, I think something Lauren said is bears repeating, is that, and this doesn't have so much to do with global markets necessarily, but it's important for technology companies to be able to understand the big picture of, if you're going to sell into the military, you at least need to be conversant and what the strategies are and even what some of the doctrine is. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert at it, but it's frankly not that hard to be conversant or to find somebody who will teach you how to be conversant. Because ultimately this will lead you to be a better supplier and a more relevant supplier if you can really understand what it is that the military is trying to do, how it's trying to do it, and then how your technology fits into it. You know, I had somebody once tell me, you know, I have this great robot, you know, and I can't understand why, you know, they just don't buy my robot. And there's lots of issues with that comment, but one of the reasons is the Army at least doesn't just think of it that way. They think of what's the doctrine in which I'm going to deploy this robot? How many people do I need to train to use the robot? What's the career system for those robots and robot operators? And that may all sound bureaucratic in some ways, but it's the way that the services think about this technology integration. And so it all starts with a fundamental understanding of some of the basics and some of the basic strategies and some of the basic doctrine.
That's true. And also, I might just add, in the alliance space, whilst a little bit more difficult to understand and sort of divine, is the sort of policy structure which underpins technology sharing between even friends. It can be quite a tricky space, and I think someone asked earlier on, you know, how does contracting between between the allies work? Well, it doesn't. It essentially is a company to independent government type arrangement, sort of layered in ITAR and export controls, depending on which country you're coming from and which way you're going. There are technology sharing arrangements behind the scenes, so you might see that one company shares technology, one country shares technology with another country, but they're a little bit ad hoc and a little bit sporadic. So, but there are really cool military exercises that you can learn about where they do show technology to allies. One called RIMPAC, which is a big, Indo-Pac sort of base exercise, which is gets to show technology off. And there's a whole bunch of other ones that sort of are which are publicly known, publicly available to research, and which are the opportunities to show off technology, actually in some cases in a really cool environment if you can manage to get there. So yeah, it's worth sniffing around the space.
So we have about 5 minutes left. David, there was one question that came in that's primarily, I think, for you, and then we'll go around and let everybody do closing comments. But and I know you're not here as the Waymo General Counsel, but the question was about large companies in Silicon Valley acquiring, that are eager acquirers, prolific acquirers of small companies and their technologies for a variety of reasons. And the question was, can you walk us through some of the common legal implications of those deals? I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, well, I'll try to keep it short so that we have time to go back around before time. It's a good question. I think there's going to be sort of the business side, which is going to be looking at, product execution, total addressable market, proof points that you're able to demonstrate, all the other different business considerations. And then on the legal side, part of the vetting is going to be around some of the issues that we talked about. Is your IP secure? Do you have a patent strategy? Do you have patents in the works, at least filed? Are there going to be patent issues with other companies in the space? Are your trade secrets protected? Have you kept things confidential? In other words, is there valuable IP? That's really the bottom line, right? And can we take this technology and scale it? A lot of the larger tech companies are going to be, when they look at acquisitions, they're looking at whether they can take it to the next level and scale it. And so part of the questions will be around sort of that as a business consideration, IP on the legal side, I think the security aspects and investment is important as well, whether they'll be tripping up on any of the types of security or investment related regulations that we've talked about over this past hour. So those are just a couple. I'll stop there so we have a chance to go around the room. I will address, I saw in the chat a couple questions or comments about trade secrets versus patents. And I'll just real quick, you can patent source code without having to send the actual source code to the patent office. You describe it in the patent application. So there is a way to address the concern around sending source code off to a government agency. Also, yes, be careful when you're sharing trade secrets and things with third-party partners like universities or other programs. It is possible to trip up and end up licensing some of your ideas to those partners inadvertently. So it's always important to get good guidance before you do those kinds of things. And with that, Bo, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, great. Well, we've been at it almost an hour and we didn't even talk about China, so that's pretty good. But unless you want to cover it in your final thoughts. So we'll go around the horn, and Tanvir, I'll start with you. Any final thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I would just, it's been a fun-filled discussion with lots of good advice. I would say, you know, to close on the piece about entering the national security world, if you basically, my advice as a venture investor and as a former entrepreneur in this space is you got to manage a paradox. You have to manage, you know, I always ask every single company I've ever invested in or joined or got involved in, I ask, what's their moat? And is part of developing your cyber resiliency or building resiliency and building process. So you have a patent strategy, you have an IP strategy, you have a regulatory strategy, is you're making you're building you're solidifying your moat. And so you should, you know, the best advice, the best thing I want to with is, as an entrepreneur managing growth, you're managing resiliency, and just make sure that you know, whether you do it on different days, that you are intentionally thinking about things, because if you scoop up to one side, you scoop up the other, you're going to be you're going to lose your entrepreneurial edge, or you're going to be kind of so so wide where it'd be hard to kind of put something together. So, you know, be comfortable in paradox and manage that resiliency versus growth. That's my closing remarks.
Great. Adam?
I'll mention China. You know, the reality at the moment strategically is that the US and its allies is in a period of strategic competition with China on innovation. And it's not something that each country can win, if that's the right verb, by itself. And, you know, innovation in an alliance context is really important for national security. For all the entrepreneurs who are out there who are, you know, considering being involved in this space, we're really glad that you are. It's really important that your technology gets to the pointy end, and you should be assured and reassured that there are companies in allied countries who are doing exactly the same thing to contribute to the effort. So, thanks.
Great. David?
Sorry, I had muted myself. Yeah, just very briefly, I would say in thinking through opportunities, look at some of the things we talked about on the legal side that are legal risks, not as blockers, but as an opportunity to get good guidance and good counsel to enable and facilitate your technology development and your business, and think through how to map that out in a way that supports your business goals and your growth.
Great. Lauren, you want to bring it home?
Sure, and I'll double tap on the China piece. I think when we're talking about spectrums with five eyes at one, China is at the very end of that spectrum on the other side. I think when we talk about countries we deem adversarial in this sense is really where we see the issue is with China. That said, I think one thing we didn't talk about today is that particularly for dual use companies, what we want you to do is be careful making decisions about joint ventures, accepting investments, doing businesses in those countries. However, there are ways to continue to mitigate, for example, setting up a separate federal entity with a proxy board over it or a special security agreement to oversee that work. And I've seen many companies go through that process because they can't ignore China as a market. For example, work with a video gaming company who I helped take through that process because they were approached by the US and UK governments to do work. So there are ways to mitigate it. It's just what we want you to take away today is to, be asking yourself these questions and also be aware of the threat when it comes to going into business with those countries, particularly China. But thank you, Bo, I think for organizing this discussion and wonderful group today. This has been a lot of fun.
Well, I want to thank my all-star A-team panel here. I knew it would be fabulous, and you guys did not disappoint. For anybody in the audience that would like to follow up with any of the panel members, just put your request in the chat, and we'll get it over to you. Thanks again, team, and David, we'll come back to you.
Thank you, General, and to all of the panelists. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. It was fantastic.
Yeah, the Major General was above and beyond, weren't they? All of them were. I thought they were great.
Fantastic.
He talks about his outstanding panel. I thought they were above and beyond, as we have had some pretty good stuff all day. I'm most impressed.
So all of this is going to be available on YouTube. Usually takes us about 10 days to get these sliced and diced into separate videos, etc.
Sliced and diced.
And we put them out on a YouTube channel where you'll be able to see them, segment by segment. So please check out the America's Future Series YouTube channel and be prepared to see that probably Friday of next week. It takes us a little while to get them all out there.
Yep. But we'll do it. Murray Media working hard to make it happen. And Murray Media, I have to tell you, is most proud to be a part of this as well. I really want you to know that. My son, Doug, and I, we, after my 30 years as a television news anchor, we got together after he graduated from grad school and said, hey, television production company, let's go. Now, through the years, with all that's happened in the last 15 months and thereabouts, virtual or words and things we didn't, hybrid and all these other things.
You guys have pivoted very well, haven't you?
Well, we've got the anchor desks and we've got podcast studios and we've got other studios. And so we're delighted to be a part of it. But this is really special to be a part of the American Future Series. So,
well, I'd like to thank you for that. I'd like to thank you. And as a matter of fact, you didn't ask for this, but I know you guys have got a video. I would love for you to show that, and so that people understand a little bit about what you all do, because you guys have been very supportive of us over the years for 10 years now, and in particular during the pandemic, et cetera, opening up your studios to us, helping us host, et cetera. So if Justin, if you guys have got that video, I think it would be great if people a little understood what Murray Media does.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome.
That would be great.
Go for it, Justin.
Hey, how about it? Ever find yourself in the need for audio or video services? Maybe staging for a live production or special event. Whether it's indoors or out, large or small, audio or video, Murray Media can get the job done, professionally, efficiently, and competitively. From creation to conclusion, the Emmy Award-winning team at Murray Media is prepared and poised to video your world. From corporate and industrial videos to nonprofit videos and special events, even those with well-known celebrities on hand. Television programs, TV commercials, website videos for both professional and personal use. Simply visit our website at murraymedia.net. We look forward to talking with you. Murray Media, always poised to video your world.
Very nice. Well, thank you, David. Murraymedia.net if you want to learn more about all the new things now that we're doing, in addition to what you just saw in that video. So,
well,
thank you.
I thought that was only appropropriate. We need to show you.
That's very kind.
People
That's
need
very
to know
kind.
what you guys do, et cetera, and reach out to Scott and Doug and the entire crew. And they can even book talent for you. They can help you get famous people to show up.
We sure can, and more than happy to do so.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to take a little bit of a break, and then we're going to come back. I think it is with is it Major General Boe Young again? No, it's Gloria Chu.
Gloria Chu is going to be next.
With Ensign, our title sponsor, is going to come back and
right.
And tee up a great conversation. So stand by. Come back in about 5 minutes.
Sounds good. We'll see you then.